Right. So if they invest big money, significant money, let's say, in a big name or established veteran, where? What position group, Kyle? What do you think? Give me your power poll of most vital positions where you think the Cardinals are going to target.
Cornerback to me would be number one. I think that's obvious looking at where they stand without either outside corner exactly nailed down. Wide receiver is another one where I think they could go after one. Still kind of with limbo with Larry Fitzgerald. I don't know what you do if he comes back, if they still targeted number two, and then, I mean, then you have four starting receivers, and it gets a little bit murky at that point how that all shakes out. But I still think wide receiver is a natural one. Tight end as well. I mean, if Larry comes back and you feel like you're going to run it back with Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, and DeAndre Hopkins, maybe the way you add to those pass catchers is you get one of the better tight ends and put him in that mix. So I think all three of those positions, and then interior offensive line and maybe still edge rusher are in that mix, depending on what your plan is, what you want to do. But to me, corner and then some sort of pass catching option, whether it be wide receiver or a tight end, would be my top two.
Darren, your reaction to that?
I don't know how you could go with anything but cornerback right out of the box, just because of the situation they're in and the unknowns. When you're talking about both your starters are going to be free agents, not knowing what Patrick Peterson's market might be, and just the fact that they haven't, the couple of cornerbacks they have, other than Byron Murphy, they've tried to use some late round picks on cornerbacks and haven't really developed anything. The Kevin Peterson has been basically their most reliable number 4 cornerback the last couple of years because of Robert Alford's injuries. And with all due respect to Kevin Peterson, I'm sure they'd like to upgrade there. So I think the Patrick Peterson thing is the most interesting now that J.J. Watt is here. Does that change his mindset? And what does his market look like by the time we get to March 17th? Because I do think he could still have a decent market, but there's supposed to be a lot of cornerbacks out there. I know Pro Football Focus only has him as like the 13th best scheduled free agent to be, and that's before guys like Desmond Trufant are being released. And so, again, it goes back to what we were talking about before. This market is going to be flooded in a lot of ways. How much does that impact every single individual player? It's going to be very, very interesting.
I find it intriguing, too, that when Michael Bidwell and Steve Keim have been asked recently on air about the future of Patrick Peterson, they tend to hit zoom out and then talk about veterans in general having to realize the cap ramifications this year. And if you put 1 + 1 together, it sort of leads me to believe that Pat hasn't come to that reality yet, perhaps. And maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe he hits the open market, to Darren's point, and there is a team. All it takes is one that's going to give him an 8-figure salary that he's accustomed to. I'm just guessing, Kyle, the Cardinals aren't that team right now, and that they'd love an answer to Pat P before March 17th. I don't think they're going to get it. I think there's a divide, and he's going to have to test the market to see it for himself.
I think we always kind of felt like that would be the case. I mean, Patrick Peterson has this incredible resume from the past, All-Pro, 8-time Pro Bowler. I mean, he's done everything you want from a cornerback, and he's saying, look at what I've done and look what I can still be. And then teams might say, okay, what are you going to be in the future? It's great that you've done that, but can you continue to play at that level? And I think that's an interesting conversation, and one that they have to figure out whether there's a meeting spot in between both of those ideas, or if there is a team that thinks Patrick Peterson is a Pro Bowl cornerback. Because if there's one team out there that thinks he has that within him, then they're going to give him a decent deal, especially a team that is on the brink of contention. I mean, if you can get a number 1 cornerback added to your group for a decent deal this offseason, that's a really good value. So I think a lot of it depends on how he is looked at across the league. Like, yeah, if you look at the PFF numbers and you think he's an average cornerback, then nobody's going to pay him. But PFF doesn't always tell the same story that team evaluations do. They look at it a lot differently. So we're going to know Patrick Peterson's market value pretty quickly. And I agree, over the next 8-10 days, I think we're going to have a good idea of exactly what Patrick Peterson thinks he's worth, and then what he is worth, and whether that means coming back to the Cardinals or going somewhere else, I still have no idea. But it's certainly, to me now, the most intriguing thing after the Watt signing, where the Hassan Reddick is more on the back burner because they found another pass rusher. Now, still, what is going to happen at cornerback?
Do you think Reddick, Darren, fits that same scenario where he's going to have to hit the open market too before the Cardinals even consider making an offer? Because I'm guessing what he's expecting, what the Cardinals are willing to offer, there's a large gap right there.
Well, I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but quite frankly, with those guys, Hassan Reddick definitely, but with Patrick Peterson, you'd be dumb not to investigate the market. Now, the issue with every player, when you talk about, because this has happened in the past in regular off seasons with a regular cap, is that sometimes the Cardinals say, look, this is going to be what we're offering, and if you don't want it, that's cool. But if we get to free agency, that offer might not be there because we might spend that money elsewhere, whether it's the money or fill that position. So that's the risk you're taking if you don't take it beforehand. So that always could be part of this with anybody. But when it comes to Reddick, I mean, again, you only get to be a free agent so many times. And I think, as we said the other day, I think he's more likely than Patrick Peterson to take a one-year deal to cash in if the contract isn't here. But as we saw with Marcus Golden, that's what Marcus Golden did in New York, and then had a 10-sack season, and he still never got the market he was expecting. So there's a risk there too. I think Hassan Reddick would flourish in a defense that featured J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones. But if he's not going to get paid like he wants to and somebody else is willing to do that, he's got to consider that. So, yeah, I do think, like Patrick Peterson, he needs to test the market. I don't think he would close the door on coming back to the Cardinals even if he did that. But usually if you get to the market and somebody wows you, that's it. It reminds me of the Calais, when Calais left. And he desperately wanted to stay with the Cardinals so badly that he even called them even though he knew they weren't going to go up to it. He called them back saying, this is what I'm being offered from Jacksonville. And he didn't say this, but he was almost begging his agent to beg them to like make something work. And it just wasn't going to. And so we'll see how that plays out.
If I remember that All Access Calais video, because I was thinking of exactly that, didn't the Cardinals come up a little bit to 12 per year? But then when Jacksonville hit 15 per year, Cardinals are like out. It just wasn't happening.
Well, and to clarify with the Calais stuff, because I still see fans kind of off. And first of all, he proved that he was worth that money through the 4 years, which just ended. So he exceeded expectations. The Cardinals did not think Calais was done when they let him go. What they thought was he had 2 more really good years left in him, and they didn't want to pay for 4 years of really good years. And so that's what they were hesitant about, and that's what Jacksonville was willing to do. Now, it turned out Campbell was worth it, but that's where they were going with it. They were trying to be smart for the long term and take the short-term hit. Oh, and they were kind of hoping Robert Condici was going to turn into something, which he did not. So there again, with all these free agents, there's a risk you take for letting a guy go, and there's a risk you take in J.J. Watt and signing a guy. And I just read an article by Michael Lombardi, the former front office guy, basically drilling the Cardinals for giving J.J. Watt way too much money for how old he is. And again, if he doesn't perform, the Cardinals are going to get roasted. And if he does perform, they're going to look like geniuses. And we'll see where it lands.